So today I wanted to talk about borderline personality disorder, especially what it looks like after a breakup, what it looks like when they're coming back from a breakup, when you're in the middle of no contact, and kind of clarify some issues because borderline is one of the more confusing disorders, especially in terms of a relationship and what to expect. It depends on the person. It depends on the subset that they have. Like I will say, if you have one of the more externalized or kind of the more outwardly aimed versions or subsets of borderline, then they can be more dangerous. They can be more toxic. They can be more unfaithful. They can be more given to being impulsive, but that's not all of them. So a lot of times there's a lot of like blanket condemnation for somebody wrestling with borderline. I'm kind of right in the middle. I think you should take it by person and by case and by relationship, because the truth is not all borderlines are the same. They really are very, very different. And I will say, on behalf of some really good people that suffer from borderline, I've said this in multiple videos, but if you're borderline, then chances are you're highly intelligent, you're probably very intense, and you're probably very sensitive. And I don't mean sensitive you cry at a coffee commercial. I mean sensitive you probably pick up things. You probably pick up on attitudes and shifts towards you. Actually, you're probably ultra sensitive in a lot of ways. So it's not like a blanket condemnation if you're wrestling with borderline. If somebody is wrestling with borderline, and they're willing to get the help, if they're able to identify and enthusiastically want help to kind of stop the patterns and learn how to harness and process through intense emotions, then it can be amazing. A lot of times they're incredible, exceptional people, and that's why you're so addicted to them. But on the other hand, if they're not willing to get the help, if they're not willing to recognize it and enthusiastically jump into getting help, and a lot of times it can be pretty serious. It's not just like one time a week. If they're willing to get help, again, it's amazing. So again, this is not going to fit every situation. But a lot of times, if you're wrestling with borderline, there's a good chance you were probably raised in an environment that is emotionally inconsistent. Most of the time, the relationship with the mother is very critical and very driven. In other words, the mother is the voice in the ear saying, you need to make sure you do this, or this is going to happen. You need to make sure you don't do this, or this is going to happen. And they'll do it under the guise of being protective. Or the other version of that is the ultra best friend. My mom is my best friend kind of person. Where the child and the daughter grows up and they're almost inseparable. On the outside, it looks like very loving and very protective. But in either case, either the overly protective best friend mother or the critical driving negative voice mother. In either case, it's an exceptionally close relationship with the mother to the child. What that mother's really doing is building in a major aspect or identity or part of that personality into that child that's actually directed and connected to what the mother thinks. So in a healthy mother-child relationship, you want parents that are going to raise you to be independent and capable. The older you get, the more able and capable you are of living without them. In a borderline situation, a lot of times the older you get, the more dependent you get, the more you're learning not to trust yourself. Now, a lot of times in that case, the dad is either absent or he's the lapdog. But usually the dad is kind of the safer, but also the more submitted to the wife in that situation. So they grow up and at a very early age, they have a very strong idea of expectations. This is how they need to perform. This is how they need to appear. In essence, this idealized version is who they need to become, but they don't have the emotional consistency to actually feel nurtured throughout their life. So by the time they're teenagers, usually around puberty, they're really wrestling with the collision of idealized thinking, but a fractured sense of identity. Because how are you supposed to maintain this level of almost perfection with your life when you don't even really know who you are? When in your emotional environment, some days you got praise, some days you were the source of pride, other times you weren't just a source of aggravation and frustration. You got the very strong sense that they were ashamed of you. You got the very strong sense that you better be better. Not just try better, but you yourself need to be better. And in their teen years, a lot of times at a very early age, they start wrestling with anxiety, depression, insecurity. They'll start getting therapy for aspects of what's really being kind of generated and caused by the foundation of borderline. A lot of times they might be ADHD or ADD because both of those disorders tend to happen to people that are highly creative, intense, sensitive, and intelligent, but come from a environment that makes it uncomfortable, that makes it insecure. So in other words, a lot of times your home life with ADHD, ADD, or borderline happens to a highly intelligent, sensitive, creative person who's in an environment that's toxic, but they're not old enough or capable enough for fight or flight. If you don't have fight or flight, you're not going to be sure how to react. So it's almost like you stay in a high state of alert and paranoia that kind of develops. But anyway, by the time they get through their teen years, they're already wrestling with deeper, darker thoughts of depression, loneliness, isolation. But by the time they become young adults, they tend to be attracted to three types of men more than any other, or three types of personality more than any other. The majority of cases with borderline, it does tend to be women. I'm not saying men can't get it. Women are the one that will get diagnosed with borderline. I'm not trying to be sexist. I'm just saying that's actually the statistics that are out there. So a lot of times that woman is going to be drawn to somebody who's one of three types of personalities. The first one is kind of the narcissist. They're a lot of times attracted to a manipulator. The second type is actually what we kind of call the commander mentality, or I started kind of nicknaming him the poet warrior. The poet warrior is somebody that's both romantic and sensitive, but kind of bold. They have a strong sense of who they are. They're competitive. A lot of times they're pulled into the military or police world. They're kind of built for being involved in a good battle. I don't mean they're troublemakers. As a matter of fact, they're kind of the natural predator to the douchebag, and they just kind of feel this. They have a deep sense of conviction, a deep sense of being heroic and justice-oriented. And because they have that willing to fight for what they want and for what they believe in and for who they love mentality, it'll come back and really torment them later when they start to get discarded from somebody with borderline. The third type we kind of refer to as a calculator mentality, or sometimes we call it an orchestrator mentality. These are the kind of people that are very, again, they have a strong sense of who they are, much like the commander mentality, except instead of being more extroverted and more bold and kind of drawn to life on the edge, and that, policeman, military, entrepreneur mentality, this is a guy that might be more of like a doctor or a lawyer, highly intelligent, highly structured, highly driven, detail-oriented, checklist-oriented, very reliable. So what do those three different personalities have in common? Well, all three of them tend to have a very strong sense of identity. And because borderline at its core is an identity crisis that's manifested through an anxiety or emotional dysregulation, at the core of it, they don't know how to know what they know. They don't really know who they are. So that's where this fear of abandonment comes into play. Or I like to change one word and not just call it a fear of abandonment. Somebody suffering with borderline has a belief in abandonment. They're very much drawn to guys that have a strong sense of who they are. Or a woman. They can be drawn to a woman with a strong sense of who they are. They're drawn to people that have what they don't feel. And because those three types have a strong sense of identity in who they are, it really attracts that person suffering with borderline. And when that girl and one of those guys or one of those personalities with a strong identity really kind of get together, it's not just limerence. It's what I kind of call super limerence. It's like limerence on a scale of 1 to 10. It's like a 15. When you're falling in love with somebody struggling with borderline, it's not an intentional manipulation. In the beginning, while they're idealizing you, they really see you as the perfect person. They really see you as somebody that's too good to be true. Now, in the beginning, there's still anxiety even in that wonderful stage. You just don't see it, because it's covered up with this thick layer of joy, of happiness, of excitement. If you look closely and remember back, you'll probably see signs of anxiety underneath all that in terms of, I love you, do you love me? They'll start talking about the future. More often than not, they'll start talking about the future before you. They'll start saying things like they'll love you first. They might start using that glowing, extreme language like, I've never met anybody like you. I've never felt this way before. I've never felt so understood. It's called the entangled period, the enmeshed period. And it's so amazing and euphoric at the beginning that you really bond on a level that you never felt before. You might even stop and realize, you know what? Normally, if I start dating somebody and it's this heavy and it's this constant, I would feel suffocated. But something about them, I can't get enough. That's why they call it the entangled or enmeshed period, because they're idealizing you. And they're idealizing you from such an authentic, not needy, not dependent, not clingy, but they're doing it in a way that actually makes you feel admired, that makes you feel respected. When you're being idealized, you feel like this person sees you and knows you better than maybe anybody else has before. And because they see you in a way and to a level that you hadn't felt before, and they admire you and they respect you and they want you, it's really intoxicating. You're falling in love with two people. You're falling in love with them because on their own, they are amazing, intelligent, incredible people. But they also make you fall in love with the person you feel like you are when you're with them. You know, most of us feel like we're walking around and on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being my ultimate version of myself, I'm not my ultimate version of myself. I wish people saw me that way, but I don't even know that I see myself that way. I see myself as like a 6 or a 7 compared to what I could be. Well, that borderline, when they're falling in love with you, they see you as the perfected version of you. And because they feel so much admiration and love and passion towards you, you kind of feel supercharged. You might just not just feel like this is the person you love more than anybody else. You feel like this version of me that I just know that I am when I'm with them. When I'm with them, I feel like the best version, the most powerful version, the most unstoppable, confident, fearless version of me. And I love how that feels. And I love them for making me feel that way. So it's like this synergistic effect. And it really idealizes you and them and the relationship together. And it's amazing. But underneath all that amazing, there's probably still a seed of insecurity where they might be a little jealous. They might be a little afraid that you don't love them quite as much as they love you. Usually there's an aspect of the relationship that stops it from being completely achieved. Maybe it's long distance. Maybe there's another relationship that's getting cleared up. It could be anything that kind of keeps you from feeling like the relationship has actually peaked. In other words, they're very good at thriving in a relationship while you're falling in love. But when they catch your heart and you get engaged, or maybe you've already been engaged, but now there's a wedding date set and you're getting closer to that date, something that really kind of solidifies that it's not just we're falling in love, now we're in love. Now, as soon as they know that they've kind of captured your heart, and this is not an intentional manipulation, but what kind of breaks that spell of being idealized and everything being so euphorically wonderful is if either life comes along and really kind of rocks you, something really kind of makes you show that you're human. You're not the idealized guy. You're not that perfect guy. You're not Superman. You actually can get rattled. Or you actually succeed in letting the person with borderline know that you really do not only love them today, but you're ready to lock down and commit and confirm tomorrow. Well, all of a sudden, the fact that they caught the man of their dreams, that they fully captured your heart, actually triggers this internal anxiety and makes them start to question if maybe you're the one for them after all. And it seems very strange. But on a scale of 1 to 10, that 15 passion, romance, and everything else drops down to like a 9. And now they'll start to analyze and hyperanalyze and magnify flaws and start to pull back. Now, if you jump in and try to regain or recapture that level of intensity, well, now you're accidentally reinforcing even more that you're not the man of their dreams. Because deep down, they believe the man of their dreams is too good, too important, too valuable, too high worth to want to be with somebody as broken as them. So if you're the kind of guy that's willing to commit to them forever, even if they consciously want happily ever after and the white picket fence and the kids and the, close your eyes and imagine the perfect family, they want that, but they only want that with the love of their life. The only problem is the knight in shining armor, their love of their life is supposed to be too good to want to be with them. That's why they had trouble believing that you love them as much. That's where that anxiety and the second guessing and the jealousy was coming from in the idealized period, because they were convinced deep down you were ultimately going to find out how broken they are and you wouldn't want to be with them. Except now you're showing that you really do know them and you really do want to be with them. You would think that would ease or heal their fear of abandonment. But what if it wasn't a fear of abandonment? What if it was a belief in abandonment? And since you're proving that you're not willing to walk away by actually letting them know, hey, I'm not just here today. I want to be here for you forever, for the rest of my life. The only problem with that is that if you actually feel like you're unfixably broken, then the person that you're falling in love with, you're going to think is too intelligent, too high worth, and too high value to want to be with somebody like you because you think you're broken. So if that person proves to you they really do want to be with you, that isn't going to fix or heal your belief in abandonment. What it's going to do is make you reframe them. In other words, on a subconscious level, well, wait a minute. If he's not too smart or if he's not willing to recognize that I'm too broken to want to be with, then maybe he's not the man of my dreams. The problem is with borderline, if you actually feel like you're not only broken but unfixably broken, and you actually feel like the man of your dreams is inevitably, or the person of your dreams is inevitably going to realize that you're too broken to want to be with, and when that person doesn't realize that you're too broken to be with, and they actually seem, the more they know you, even your flaws, the more they're willing to stick beside you, the more they're willing to talk about forever and commit and confirm that they're going to be with you from now until death do us part. Well, wait a minute. That can't be right because you know how broken you are. So if this person is willing to sign up for happily ever after with you, well, then maybe they aren't the person that you thought they were. See, what happens is if you're not borderline, but you're in love with somebody who is, you sense that fear of abandonment. And you think, because a lot of times there's that sacrificial, heroic heart, especially if we're talking about that commander or poet warrior mentality again. Remember, they're justice oriented, right and wrong. They kind of have that hero's heart. So they're sacrificial. They'll take abuse. They'll take disrespect. They'll take actual pain if they think the person they're fighting for is actually authentic. And a lot of times when you're in love with borderline, despite the cruelty, the anger, the outbursts, the cheating, there's a part of you that knows deep down inside under all that, there's an authentic, wounded, deeply exceptional person who's worth saving. So you think, well, if maybe me tolerating this abuse is actually going to prove to them that they're worthy of love. Maybe they're having these reactions because they don't know what it's like to be loved. And you think, well, I'm going to show this person with borderline that they are worth loving, that I'm the one strong enough to not be chased away. I think because they have a fear of abandonment, that they think they're going to push me away, and I'm going to show them that I love them enough to stay forever in spite of how they're treating me. That never works. The more you decide to tolerate disrespect, the more you decide to tolerate abuse because you think you're healing this wound, this fear of abandonment, by staying no matter how badly they treat you, all you're doing is proving to them that you were never the man of their dreams that they thought you were. You can't be the man of their dreams because you not only stayed, now you're taking abuse. You're not proving that you're high value. You're proving that they must have misread you. You're not only not the guy strong enough to walk away, you're the guy pathetic enough to take this abuse and keep coming back for more. So the more you keep swallowing pain, the more you keep swallowing just unreasonable disrespect and toxic abuse in a relationship because you think you're proving that they're worthy of love, you're not proving to them they're worthy of love. You're proving to them you're not worthy of respect. And it just drains the attraction more and more. So that's what causes the breakup. Now with borderline, a lot of times there are differences. So it doesn't look the same all the time. I'm going to put the 9 traits and characteristics of somebody dealing with borderline off to the side and just kind of leave it parked there in this video so you can kind of use it for a quick reference to kind of meet the diagnostic standard. To meet the standard to be diagnosed as borderline, you need to hit 5 out of those 9. But not everybody with borderline is the same. And one of the things that gets really confusing is sometimes people will call me and they'll say, well, she told me she was borderline, or I found out that she was borderline through her mother, or somehow it'll come up. But I looked up borderline and she doesn't hit all those markers. Well, they're not supposed to, but it's 5 out of 9. And then there are different subsets of borderline as well. So they manifest differently. And you can usually tell a lot of times during the breakup, and usually somebody with borderline, if you walk away and do no contact long enough with borderline, guess what? You're reframing yourself as being the guy strong enough to walk away. So the worst thing you can do when borderline breaks up with you is chase and plead and beg and cry and chase and beg. It doesn't work. It'll drain the attraction. Even if they take you back in the short term, it's only a matter of time before they cut you loose and push you away again, but this time with even less respect and even less attraction left in the tank. You actually have to kind of draw a deep breath, remind yourself of your own worth, and have the strength to walk away. Reinvest in yourself. Remind yourself of the attributes and the characteristics that attracted her to you in the first place, and kind of build your own sense of worth back up. You have to have a strong sense of who you are if you want to re-attract them, and re-attracting them is dangerous. Is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible. It's undeniably possible. Is it a good idea? Usually no. It depends on if the person is willing to get the help and commit to it. If they're not willing to get the help and commit to it, then you're chasing after a very painful ending. You're chasing after something that's just going to get worse and worse with time, and you will lose your own self-value the more you're trying to force it. And you can't argue or reason or explain your way into somebody with borderline. It's just not going to heal it unless they really get some help for it. But it doesn't look the same, and that's one of the more confusing aspects of it. So I'm going to kind of go over the 4 of them, the 4 subsets of borderline, and they go by different names. So the first subset I want to talk about is called discouraged. Now, discouraged, a lot of times, it can also be known as high functioning. In other words, on the outside, it's the one that can be more easily missed because a lot of times it doesn't have the toxic temper level, or if it does, it might have some outbursts because none of these are going to be 100% matches. But the discouraged one might have some of the less outburst. And because they really look like they don't have a disorder. To kind of hit the standard of being marked as a disorder, there needs to be a significant impairment on your life. Well, somebody wrestling with discouraged borderline can actually be highly successful. They can be very successful in business, in whatever area, whatever type of a career they're drawn to. They can only do well. They can thrive. Somebody with borderline usually has a very high standard for themselves. That even on the outside, even though they're impressive, internally they feel like no matter what they've achieved, they're not achieving quite enough. That's especially true with that discouraged level. And a lot of times when they'll break up with you, it's not nearly as quick. Somebody with discouraged borderline can stay with you for a long time. Now, the idealized version won't stay in place, but they'll stay with you longer a lot of times. And when they're breaking up with you, and it kind of feels like they ran an analysis on you. You don't hit these little markers, and because of these little markers, they've kind of foreseen the future, and they'll say things like, when I really think about it, I don't think we have a chance because of this, this, and this. And even though you haven't run into that yet, they see it happening in the future, so they're going to go ahead and break up with you. Almost like they ran a pro and con analysis. And it turns out you were just a little bit more on the con, so they're going to have to let you go. The second one I want to cover is called self-destructive. Now, kind of take the discouraged that I just described and add another level of depression. another level of kind of internal analysis. The discouraged will have a conversation with you. Now, it might seem a little bit emotionally disconnected, a little bit cruel, maybe a little bit cold-blooded, a little bit apathetic, like somebody just turned off their connection circuits. But somebody wrestling with self-destructive will break up with you and then kind of enter into a level of self-loathing. They have more depression. They'll really kind of go into an isolation. They'll be sad if you check on them later because maybe you're doing a reach-out attempt. They might be crying while they break up with you. A lot of times somebody that's kind of self-destructive or even discouraged, when they're breaking up with you, they can be very sad. They can't actually, and especially self-destructive, they'll go into a deeper level. They'll say that they just can't do this, and they imagine the future, they imagine how it's going to be, and it's just not right for them, and they're not even sure why. But the anxiety itself kind of becomes the evidence. Well, I wouldn't be feeling this way. I wouldn't be feeling this way if we were supposed to be together. I wouldn't be having this anxiety if we were supposed to be together. So they'll end up kind of pushing you away and going into the self-loathing level of depression, and they don't know what's wrong with them. They just know they feel a little bit less of that anxiety by breaking up with you, even though they feel horrible and guilty and a lot of self-shame because they're breaking up with you. The other two are more dangerous, toxic, abusive, and disrespectful. The one that's known as petulant. They call it petulant because it's very much childlike. It's kind of like a tantrum. A lot of times somebody with petulant borderline will even have like an alternate identity. Like they might act like the kid. They might act like the spoiled brat. They might act like the fun but dangerous one. It's almost like they're shifting into different versions of their persona. And when they break up with you, they'll break up with you and they'll say something like, well, you never really liked me enough anyway. Almost like this childish test. I'm breaking up with you because, well, you should have known, or you didn't give me enough attention, or you didn't. You see kind of the childish vibe that comes with that. And then if you go into no contact and really reclaim your sense of value, a lot of times they'll reach out. Well, I knew you didn't want to be with me. You didn't even chase. You didn't try to talk me out of it. They'll blame you for breaking up with you, and they'll blame you for accepting the breakup. They can be childish. They can be very cruel, disrespectful. Just like a kid in grade school might call you names and make you feel horrible. Well, they'll call you little names, or they'll post something a lot of times to try to embarrass you on social media. So it's childish, but it's painful because this is the person that not long ago was crazy in love with you and thought you were the perfect person that hung the moon and impressed them. And now they're almost treating you like you're the unpopular kid in high school, and they're making fun of you. So that's kind of petulance, but it all looks different. And then the fourth type is called externalized, or sometimes also known as impulsive, but it's really the more dangerous. And this one is the one that really has a huge overlap with narcissism. It can be really dangerous. And one of the things that all four of them have in common, they have the ability to believe whatever they convince themselves of when it comes to you. You start getting to the externalized. What I mean by that is the externalized one can really kind of convince themselves that you're a manipulator. That not only are you not perfect for them, and not only does the attraction drop, but you're a bad person. Maybe you're even an evil person. And they kind of really highly vilify you to justify doing some cruel things. They can vilify you enough and that they're really cheating on you. They'll be really demanding. They can be really insulting. I mean, profoundly insulting, and just kind of tear you down. But even then, a lot of times, they want to keep you there. So they want to tear you down, but then you get too far away, just like the other just like the other three subsets. They still want to know that you're somewhat in their orbit. But they'll reach out to you and they'll be cruel. These are the ones that'll say something like, I always knew you were trash. Always knew you were a manipulator. This is the one that specifically will point back to the intimacy or to the sex life. Because normally somebody with borderline, the sex life on a scale of 1 to 10 is like a 37. But the externalized one will look back on those intense, intimate acts and now claim that you pressured her into it, that you were the one that made her. She didn't even really want to. Now that can really knock the air out of you, because any guy hears that the girl says that you pressured them and all kinds of flags are going to go off. And it can scare you so bad that you'll jump in and start apologizing for it. I had no idea. I didn't mean for you to feel pressured. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry. They'll attack you with such ferocity and such belief in their own reframing of history that a lot of times you believe it and you'll start apologizing for things you know you didn't do. Don't do it. Get as far away as you can. Take that red flag very seriously. A lot of times this is the one too that'll get a restraining order on you. They'll actually get an order of protection. They will ruin your reputation, and you're in such a tailspin because you know it's not true that you almost in desperation think, all right, well, I'm going to find a way to write them a letter or to reach out to tell them how sorry I am. If they just knew that I would never mean to come across that way, that'll fix this. No, it won't. You're just stepping into a landmine now and a minefield trying to apologize for something that was never true, but just by apologizing for it, you make it more believable. So when somebody starts attacking you from that subset and accusing you of things, get as far away as you can. So all four of them, when you give them the time and space to actually either move on with your own life or because you're just trying to win them back. Whatever the case, if you're not chasing them, then you're reframing yourself as the love of their life. Because if you're dealing with borderline, one of the consistent markers is they feel that sense of brokenness so much that they really do believe the love of their life is ultimately going to walk away from them because they'll find out how broken they are, or they believe they're accidentally going to sabotage it because they're very hard on themselves. That's why it's like this inability to know for certain. So when you walk away with strength, a lot of times it reattracts them into pulling you back. Now, if they reattract you and you jump back in too quickly, a lot of times they're going to push you away again. You could say borderline is a fear. It's two different fears. It's a fear of engulfment, being too close to you, so close that they're afraid you're not going to want them, so close that they're afraid you're going to end up rejecting them, so close that they're going to end up having you as evidence that they're broken, or fear that you're gone forever. So fear of engulfment, fear of abandonment. So they'll settle right in the middle. So a lot of times, whatever the subset, you'll find that they'll reach out to you. I will say the quiet, the discouraged, the high functioning, a lot of times is the one that's not going to reach out to you because they can pull somebody back in. They can pull somebody into their orbit and plug them into that role for a long enough time that you might have already moved on. Now, a lot of times you'll hear from them later, but it might be so much later that you've just decided that you don't want them back. Now, whatever the case, whatever subset, whatever the situation with borderline, one of the more consistent things is when they do reach out to you because you've proven with no contact or you've proven in some way, maybe you've thrived. Like one of my clients actually walked away for 11 months, but he really walked away and he was doing no contact to actually get over the person. But even though that was his intent, after their breakup, he was thriving. He was a better version of himself. So after 11 months, she reached out to him. And she said, I'd actually been watching you online, even though I've been with somebody else, and I can't get you out of my head. I thought about you every time I drove by the airport. I couldn't get you out of my mind. It seemed like you were doing better and better, and I missed you, and there were so many times I wanted to reach out to you. So it doesn't matter what your intent is in no contact. Maybe you're doing it to get over them. But if you're dealing with somebody with borderline, just by virtue of the fact that you're proving you're strong enough to get over them and thrive and do better, you're kind of reframing yourself as the one who got away. They can start to they'll tend to overanalyze because they have idealized thinking and they have a broken sense of self. If you have a broken sense of self and idealized thinking, what are you going to do? You're going to analyze things all the time. You have a broken sense of self, so you don't really trust yourself. You just know what you felt in the moment. You know how you feel now, even though a lot of times you don't even know that. So you're constantly kind of re-examining your decisions, looking at the past and making sure that you're looking at it through the right filter, looking at the future and wondering what mistakes you're going to regret, what choices you're going to wish you could redo. That's the essence of really not knowing who you are. So when you're proving that strength, whatever the subset is, a lot of times they'll reach back out to you. Whatever the subset is, don't go rushing back. The more you dive back into the relationship, the more you're proving to them that, oh, okay, maybe he isn't the love of my life. Because even after I broke up with him, and even though I thought he was gone, it took this much for me to pull him back in. And if it takes that much for me to pull him back in, I'll pull him back in, but only close enough to not trigger my fear that he's gone forever. If you want to pull somebody like this all the way back, be careful what you wish for. Again, if they're not getting help, if they're not getting therapy, you're just signing up for another ride on the roller coaster from hell. I understand how addictive it is, and I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I am here to tell you that the chances of happily ever after with somebody with borderline who's not getting help for it is zero. That's my opinion. I've never seen it work out. But if you do want to win them back and they're showing the signs that they're willing to get the help and take responsibility for what they're dealing with, then even then, try to stay in the moment. Don't commit to forever. A lot of times I'll hear this, she called and I talked to her for 4 hours, or we fell asleep on the phone together. And then what happened? I don't know. I haven't heard from her in the next 6 days. Like I said, when they pull you back, if they get that sense that you still want to be with them forever and you overcommit, it's like the whiplash effect. So just try to stay in the moment. Now, if you've been through this loop enough times that it's just exhausted you, good. Take that exhaustion, take that frustration, even a little bit of that anger, and draw a line. That's the key moment to tell the person, look, if you don't get some help for what you're dealing with, And you don't have to claim to know. Don't put it don't stamp it on their forehead. Hey, you're borderline. But you do have the right to draw a line and say, whatever's responsible for this pattern of back and forth, you love me, you can't be with me, you're certain I'm not the one, you're certain I'll always be the one, this back and forth, I can't take it anymore. So when they come back, try to stay in the moment as much as you can. Don't push for the future. Don't push for long term. Don't push for labels. A lot of times, if you can kind of stay in the moment's all they know. So you can actually kind of maintain that longer. But eventually, you're going to have to get to the point where you tell them if they're not willing to get some help for whatever they're dealing with, then you're ready to walk away. So you do have to have that line there. So that's the best way to respond, whatever the subset. Now, the different types of reach outs, depending on the subset, that subset will determine how they reach out. Sometimes they'll reach out with anger. Sometimes they'll reach out with accusations. Sometimes they'll reach out of depression. I hope that helps. I just wanted to kind of give some context into what it looks like, because there are some aspects of borderline that are consistent. There are other reactions and some of the characteristics that aren't true in every case. And there's a lot of overlap with attachment styles. So like if somebody's an avoidant attachment style or borderline, those two things can look very similar. In both cases, they really want you, and it can be hot and intense and very, very close very quickly. But in both of them, borderline or avoidant personality attachment styles, then a lot of times once they feel like they've captured your heart, once there's like this tangible sense of ongoing responsibility on their part, again, it's like that sense of now we're actually living out our happily ever after. That's kind of the trigger that makes them pull back. It's almost like they're emotionally allergic to the responsibility of ongoing affection. They don't want that because they don't know who they are enough to be able to promise you what they're going to feel in a month. They're not even sure what they're going to feel tomorrow. So a lot of times there is overlap. Also, that's very comorbid. If you're borderline, chances are you've got an avoidant attachment style. Doesn't mean if you have an avoidant attachment style, you're borderline, but there is a lot of overlap there. So I just kind of wanted to clarify, and maybe that'll be another video, the difference between avoidant attachment styles and borderline. But I hope this helps. If you're dealing with somebody with borderline, give me a call if you want to talk it through and kind of give me more of the details. I can give you more specific to your situation advice in a phone call. You can set up a call with me at dotheyloveme.com, and I'm Coach Ken. Please give me a like and subscribe if this has been any kind of use to you. I appreciate it. Take care.